Today we're going to be talking about a perennial that I have come to love, and it is sea holly. So I'm showing you sea holly that has really matured, turned blue, perfect for picking and drying at the stage, as well as a little bit more green sea holly, and you'll see why. But sea holly is one of those low maintenance perennials that can tolerate drought conditions really, really well because it's got really deep tap roots. So this is a perennial that I put in fall of 2022. I let it overwinter. It gave me a flush in the first year, and then now this is what it looks like in second year. So in this video, I want to talk about how I planted, maintained it, very, very easy. But then I want to spend more time talking about productivity and growth, especially in second year versus first year. Then I want to talk about how I've been using and selling these stems. And then last but not least, we're going to cover the numbers or the pricing. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Jessie. I grow in zone 7A in New Jersey. And typically I focus on videos on the business side of flower farming. But once in a while, I do crop specific videos because these are the types of videos and content I was looking for in my first year, in second year, and I couldn't find. So I'm here to plug that content gap. So let's talk first about maintenance. I already talked about how drought tolerant it is. It does not want to be in a waterlogged area. That being said, it can tolerate bouts of rain. It's very hardy and robust, but it can do really, really well in dry conditions. So for those of you who are in areas that doesn't get a ton of rain, like you should really consider something like sea holly. Once you plant it, you water it in, you can start it from seed. You can also get it from plugs. One thing to note is that this is one of the more expensive types of plants that you can get from plugs, for good reason, because it is a perennial and it is so productive. But you can get it from seed, you can get it from plug. It's not very difficult to start from seed. You put it in. From a spacing perspective, give it space, because this is my big mistake. I gave it about anywhere from 9 to 10 inches. If I were to put in new sea holly, I would give it at least a foot minimum, like maybe 16 inches, because this stuff grows really, really big. It's misleading in year one, because at least for me, even after overwintering, the plants were big, but they weren't beefy like this size of big. So we are at a state now where the plants are overlapping each other. The leaves got a lot bigger in second year. That was the most noticeable difference for me, which was that in like May, where the flower or the plant has not yet started sending up shoots, the leaves suddenly got super, super beefy, especially over March. So over a 2-month time span, it really put on a ton of green growth. And then all of a sudden, within 1 month, we started seeing shoots shoot up seemingly overnight. So giving it space is the main takeaway from a planting maintenance perspective. But once you put them in, they're pretty robust. So let's talk about now growth habit as well as productivity. It's pretty easy to see that this is productive. I would say that in year one, this was a little bit more of a disappointing plant, because one of the main questions I had was, do I pinch sea holly or not? I had heard people say you got to pinch it because otherwise you get one really, really thick central stem. And I heard other people say you don't need to pinch it because you're going to get side shoots that are usable. I ended up pinching half and not pinching the other half. And I would say in first year, I would recommend not pinching, because in first year, that plant has not established itself to the point where your central stem is going to be so thick that you cannot use it. So what ended up happening was I pinched it, and I ended up getting very puny and short side shoot or secondary stems that came out from that pinch. And realistically, they were not super usable. I got a usable flush out of the sea holly. It was probably about 2 buckets worth maximum, which is really nothing in comparison to this, because I'm telling you, like 4 plants or 3 plants here can fill up an entire bucket. And I have about 65 plants along this entire row. So first year, I recommend don't pinch it. Second year, because there was already a pinch done, for most of these, it didn't matter. I did not need a pinch. And for the plants that actually shot up that really thick central stalk in second year, it wasn't as thick as I thought it was going to be. And I was able to use those side shoots. So it's safe to say that you can really just be pretty hands off. I don't think you need to pinch ever, is my personal takeaway, but I would love to hear in the comments if you pinch your sea holly and whether or not you're pinching them later on. So now let's talk about productivity, because in year one, I would say that each plant produced maybe about 3 or 4 stems. And out of those 3 or 4 stems, maybe 1 or 2 were truly viably good in terms of stem length, in terms of just how I could use it in something like a mixed bouquet. Year 2 is a completely different story. I've been harvesting from this for 3 weeks, and this is why I'm showing this to you in 2 different color stages, because right now the sea holly is at its peak, but certain plants are at their peak and certain plants are not. So this plant over here is super, super blue. It's basically at its prime, ready for picking, ready for use, and it will definitely not wilt on you. Now, the problem with picking at the stage is that it apparently smells really bad. I have yet to really smell much. Some people say it smells like poop, it smells like pee. So the bluer it gets, supposedly, the smellier it is. You can neutralize it a bit by putting it into the cooler. So if you have a really tall cooler, you might be able to do that. I have a fridge that acts as a cooler, so these stems wouldn't even fit in there. But the point is that some people might actually be put off by the smell. But we're going to talk about how I've been using these and where I sell to, so you'll get an idea for where you can use stems like this. On the other hand, I have stems over here that are more, I would call green. They haven't blued up yet. And I've actually been cutting at this stage. I've been cutting from this patch for a little over 2 weeks selling it. And I find that this stage does pretty well. It holds up. Sometimes if you cut it, the tops will wilt a little bit. But again, if you put it back into the cooler, it will perk up pretty quickly. So these stems are pretty great from the perspective of they're not blue and they're not green. They're this like in-between color, so a super unique color. They don't smell as much yet because they haven't gotten to that blue stage. And again, if you want to start harvesting for an earlier season of use, you can do that. So this makes this a very, very attractive crop in my view, because I'm always looking for crops that have a long harvest window when they're in the ground blooming. And then I also look for crops that can be potentially dried. Now, I don't do a lot with dried flowers. If anything, I end up sending them to friends who use them for dried work, but this stuff can be dried really, really well. It can be used for things like wreaths. It can also be used for things like boutonnieres, things that need to stay out of the water, just because this is such a robust plant and can be dried. So very, very versatile from that perspective. And I'm finding that every single plant is sending up at least 3 shoots. Most of them are averaging 5 to 7 shoots. And these are 5 to 7 very, very beefy shoots. So that brings me into how am I using these? Because in certain cases, it's actually hard to use a stem unless if you're gonna prune off a lot of the side shoots. So I sell predominantly wholesale, and I've been selling these to florists. And what I found is that florists love to use these for things like installations. They love to use things that are tall, have a little bit of mass, and this has mass because there's so many side shoots off of one central stem, that this makes great for installations and any like outside type of work for an event. So I've had florists who have bought like 5 bunches for me at once, certain florists to just buy 1 bunch and put it around something like an arch, and it looks really, really awesome. So florists like the taller stems. They can actually ship it in and it being a taller stem. So you don't necessarily want to sell them shorter stems unless if they're using it more for like bouquet as well as centerpiece work. So I'm able to basically create 1 bunch off of like 2.5 plants, which is nuts to me here, because what that means in a sea of 60, I have more than I need in order to sell. Because even though I can sell these to florists, it's not like they're looking for these every single day. And it's not every florist who is doing installation work and wants to use something like sea holly. So I actually have a little bit too much. But I also use these in mixed bouquets, and I find that they do really, really well with really any kind of color pairing, and just this time of year when you might be lacking that textural interest. So I make a lot of perennialized, or I make a lot of bouquets from perennialized plants this time of year. So yarrow, sea holly, and lilies make the foundation of my bouquets, basically anywhere from like early to, or we'll call it like mid to late June. So the sea holly definitely gives it that pop of color as well as that interest. The challenge is that if I get a really, really thick stem, it's hard for me to use in a bouquet. So what I end up doing is I end up finding the side shoots that are tall enough for me to use in a bouquet. Once in a while, I will find a single stem that isn't crazy and I can use it in a bouquet. But I would say that actually only about 30 to 40% of what I have right now would be usable in a mixed retail type of market bouquet without me doing too much pruning off the stem. And so pruning the stem is a little bit heartbreaking because obviously you're not using a lot of the material that could be used that a florist would be able to use in a design work, but it's also just, I know, it feels like a waste to clip off all of these side shoots just for something that's a little bit more central. Anyway, so I've been able to get a lot out of this patch, and that brings us now to numbers because this is very profitable. Every single week I raise the price because every single week it just gets bigger and bigger. I started off by pricing this at $1.65 per stem. So I sell in 10 stem bunches. When I harvested, I was like, that was a little too low. So I raised the price to $1.85. The week after it went to $1.95 and now I'm at $2.10. And yes, florists are still buying them at $2.10 because of how big these bunches are. So what I talked about is just straight bunches to florists. What I'm finding is that as the season progresses and it matures, some of those side shoots are getting long enough for me to use that retail bouquet where I'm snipping those off and either using them in my retail bouquets or selling them as stems to be used in retail bouquets. And then I get to use the original stem as a part of that $2.10 bunch. So essentially I'm able to almost double dip off of the same stem. Now, not every single stem is giving me that kind of hyper productivity, but there's enough here. And so I would say that right now, because I don't have that high demand for all of the sea holly, I don't have to do that. But I could certainly see that this, I could easily take on at least like 4 times more the demand that I'm currently getting because of the ability for me to split the flower or split the stem in a way that I just talked about. So if you do the math on this entire patch, 60 plants, and we'll say that each plant I get 5 stems, that's 300 stems. If I could sell all of that wholesale for $2 each, that's $600 minimum without even factoring in snipping off the sides for retail. So not bad for something like this. Now, the problem with a crop like this is obviously it's a perennial, it needs to stay in the ground, so I'm not flipping this bed. But one thing for people to consider is that sea holly comes at a time of year where there's really not a ton of other flowers. I know that there's a lot of perennials that typically come in the spring, but this is, again, unique for its ability to dry, to have an extended bloom time, its color. So I think it's worth the real estate here, even at a $600 revenue perspective from a row. And by the way, I'm definitely undercounting, or I'm definitely underestimating the amount of potential here because I've already done at least like $400 worth in sea holly, which isn't too bad for really having zero maintenance. So if you haven't planted sea holly, or if you are waiting on whether or not you should pull the plug or whether or not you should actually buy these more expensive plugs, I would definitely recommend doing it. Now, you may not need like 100 sea holly. Split the tray with someone. I even think it's worth it to buy the tray and just plant half the tray if you don't have time to start from seed. Sea holly reseeds really, really well. When you let it dry and it just falls to the ground, it reseeds like crazy. So I'm actually thinning like crazy. That's the other thing. It's not hard to start from seed. So start from seed if you don't need like 100, if you only need 10. I think a small scale gardener or flower farmer can easily just do like 6 to 8 of these plants and actually have more than plenty that they need by the time they get to second year for cutting. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, whether or not you've grown sea holly, how it's done for you in second year, how does it do for you in third year, because that's my next question. And I'll see you guys in the next video.